Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you follow me on Twitter. It's Friday, September 15th. We'll be talking some big Friday MLB action today, as well as take a strategic look at Sunday's NFL main slate, as well as all the tools here and content at RotoGrinders. Click that link in the description. Get $10 off your first month of a combo premium package. But if you don't want to do that, you know what's free? The thummy thumbs are always free. So hit the thummy thumb, hit the thummy thumbs. Hey, give me the likes, give me the subscribes, give me the notification bells to know when we go live. Joined by the author of the $1 Million Musings. Every day here for premium members at RotoGrinders, it's Dave Potts. Cheese is good. Today's MLB slate ain't that bad.
It's really pretty great. Yeah, we run into a lot of kind of nonsense Monday, Thursday slates, especially late in the season. But this is a good one today. Yeah,
it seems like on this slate. I mean, we'll break down some pitchers. We'll take a look at some stacks. It seems like it's one of these slates. I'm used to an MLB DFS where it's like it's quite clearly there are like maybe 2 or 3 pitchers that's like you probably want to play, and if you veer from there, you're getting into like who knows what's going to happen range. This seems like the type of slate where I feel like, I mean, if you said your pitcher pool was 10 pitchers deep, like I wouldn't say that you're crazy.
yeah. I actually said, like, in the musings when I kind of talk about the big overview. I mean, I said I wouldn't even call you crazy to have a 15 pitcher pool. Like I'm not going to be that big today. I mean, I always kind of find a way to narrow it down, but yeah, at least a dozen very viable pitchers. Like it's just a crazy bunch of very good pitchers.
Right here on the $1 Million Musings, you have the big top tier, which you have Nola, Steele, Scooble, Kirby, Eflin, Green, Giolito, Javier, Miller, Lugo, Canning, Webb. I mean, that's
yeah. And then there's
that seems like a list of pitchers that I almost feel like we're going to talk about pitchers, and then it's going to be like, well, what the hell stacks are we going to play?
Right. And the thing is, like, the next tier is another 5 pitchers who are all about that good, but it's just like eventually I say, okay, I can't play all these guys. So I've X out. But like that next group is like Jose Barrios, Bailey Ober, John Gray. It's still a whole bunch of guys you don't really want to play against. So yeah, it leaves like chalky-ish hitting side. Obviously, Coors Field already in there, and then just a couple other top teams because there's just all these pitchers that you're just not. They're not great, like you can't play against them, but none of them are like, oh, I can't wait to play against, George Kirby or Bobby Miller or Justin Steele. Like, you would rather not if you don't have to.
Right, and the pitching pricing is rather reasonable. I mean, like you could take 2 pitchers and get some decent hitters. Like what? Scooble is $9K. I mean, is he the highest price? No. Well, we have Nola and Steele at $10K.
Yeah, but even that is not expensive if you want to do that.
So, are there any since we care more about GPPs, we care more about ceiling from a pitch count, like ceiling upside. Are there any pitchers that we should be maybe a little bit more worried about going long? Because obviously that extends the ceiling, the 6+ innings we'd love to have. Even though they may be in good matchups and maybe are efficient with strikeouts, are there ones that because of the innings and pitch count that maybe we should look at more and some that we should look at less? Because, I mean, I always take a look at like someone like Bailey Ober and I go, he's better get a bunch of strikeouts because he typically doesn't pitch more than like 5 innings.
Yeah. So with like with Ober, that's why he didn't actually make that top tier, because he's going to top out at 5 innings. It's more that I move a few guys up for the potential ceiling and pitch count than moving guys down. Like specifically Hunter Green, who's always just crazy boom or bust, but like they are happy to let him throw 110 pitches at any point. Whereas, George Kirby's not going to get 110.
Isn't Nola in that range also? No, I mean Nola
Yeah.
could pitch that.
So I actually think Nola is actually going to be kind of sneaky, which is weird, just because he's Aaron Nola. Like, name recognition wise and long term skills, like he's the ace. But because it's not a great matchup, I mean, he hasn't really been particularly better than any of these other guys this year. Like, he's actually probably like the 10th highest owned pitcher. Um, and he's always interesting for upside because, yeah, he has no limit on innings. I mean, if someone is going to throw a complete game, it's him. Like his last few starts have been shorter, but just because he hasn't pitched well, give him a bunch of runs. Like, there's really quite a few guys who have essentially no limit at this point. Even David Peterson, who's kind of the cheap chalk, is like if he pitches well, they'll just let him keep going. I mean, he's been between, like, sometimes he's down at 75 pitches, sometimes he gets 105. So as far as the upside, he and Hunter Green are both in that category of they'll just run him out all night if it's going well. You can kind of say the same for Giolito. I don't actually like Giolito tonight at all. I like the bats against him. But yeah, he can throw 110 pitches, and he does have strikeout ability. So there's really a bunch of those guys that have ceiling on this slate.
Especially with Peterson, he's 6,600. I mean, pairing someone like Skubal and Peterson together. I mean, obviously they're tagged here in lineup HQ. I mean, in the chat, Big Show Brandon asks, prioritize pitchers or hitters this slate. I mean, I know we're talking about a lot of pitchers that are viable, but that actually means that you would prioritize pitcher less. Like, don't play,
Yeah.
don't necessarily go and play Chase Anderson or Zach Greinke on today's slate. But would you agree that it's more important to find the stacks that are going to off because they're much scarcer on a fairly decent pitching slate? And what pitching pairing you have? If I told you that my pitching pairing was Griffin Canning and Seth Lugo, and then someone else said, no, I'm going to play Logan Webb and Tariq Skubal, and someone else was like, I'm going to play Giolito. Or I mean, you have a problem with it.
But same
Upside.
thing, yeah.
Giolito and Bobby Miller or Christian Javier, like, it's really going to come down to does your stack score 8+ runs?
Yeah, really, like the pitching, there are enough guys that are closely enough bunched that, yeah, I guess the answer to that question would be prioritize hitting. And then, like, on the, salary wise, like we talked about how, Nola is kind of expensive. Whereas like Griffin Canyon is $2,200 less. I would prioritize getting, if it's Corey Seager or Jordan Alvarez or the guy you want to spend up on, rather than saying, I'm going to spend that extra little bit on pitching. So I guess prioritize hitting would be the way I would lean.
And what's your concern with Giolito? I know obviously he has a very wide range of outcomes.
It's mostly the matchup. I mean, Texas is still good, and like the Giolito power issues are scary bad, and his control has been scary bad. Like a bunch of walks and a bunch of home runs. He's basically Hunter Green in a tougher matchup. So I don't like. It's too much risk for me on this slate when everybody has upside.
Right, and everyone has risk to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, but not to his extent.
Right.
In my opinion.
But like Javier against the Royals,
I'm not counting him at all. I'm not counting. He's actually not. I'm not going to have any. I will have zero Javier. Javier and Giolito, and throw Hunter Green in there as the highest risk. But out of those, I'm most willing to play Hunter Green because I believe his upside a little more.
Because with Javier against the Royals, you're relying more on the Royals striking out than Javier doing well. I mean, even if you take a look at the strikeout props, like Javier is like at 4.5, Giolito 5.5, and Green at 7.5. That you're essentially saying for DFS purposes, you'd rather take, like, if Javier gets into trouble, it's unlikely he's striking out 8 to like make up for the 2 or 3 earned runs he gives up. But like Green can. Like Green could give up 3 or 4 runs and still give you a workable DFS score.
Exactly. I mean, Green is just a flat out better DFS pitcher than Javier. Much higher strikeout rate this year. I have no interest in Javier, honestly. Like I put him in the musings because people are going to have interest in him. So kind of same with Giolito. Like I understand why you would do it. Like there's nothing crazy about it. But I got too many pitchers ahead of them to want to mess with that kind of risk.
So being that we're prioritizing hitters, what stacks are we looking at? Because there's doesn't seem to be. I mean, if I take a look at the ones that are like over 5, right? Obviously, we got cores, right? So you got the Giants and the Rockies, but the Rockies only have a 4 implied run total, also in cores. So you got San Francisco, you got Minnesota, you got Houston, right? You got San Diego just over 5. I know Jock Peterson, I believe, is the cover. Do you do the type of thing in your $1 million musings where that's kind of like a precursor to like someone that you're targeting?
It's more precursor to what's popular. It's not necessarily the guy I'm targeting. It's just the Giants and cores, that's chalk. So the cover boy is going to be a Giant.
Okay, so are you more likely?
I'm not actually prioritizing Jock Peterson or the Giants personally.
And so what are you prioritizing?
So essentially, the first 3 you mentioned, I think that's where the chalk ends up. Mostly Giants and Twins. Houston is kind of like obvious, but also really expensive. So I'm not overly concerned about ownership. Alvarez and Tucker will be popular-ish, but you can't really jam in the whole top of the lineup there. So I'm viewing this as Giants and Twins are what you have to be worried about the ownership on. And it's a big enough slate that, I don't know, sure, they're my top 2 teams along with Houston. Like those are my top 3, but I don't really like them that much better than everything else to worry about jamming them in. So my preferred little group are the teams that have the same kind of upside, a little less likely to hit it. But it would be the Cubs, the Rangers, the Mets, the Padres. I think that's the main group. There's some others I'll throw in there, but for the same reason I'm not playing Giolito, it's the same reason I'm playing the Rangers. Like, give me a guy who walks a bunch of people and gives up a bunch of home runs, which is the same case to play the Mets against Hunter Green. Even though I do like Hunter Green, he's always prone to that 1 or 2 disaster innings.
Right. This is the type of slate that you could have a pitcher that's 20+% owned as it is. And if you're not going to be playing the chalkier stacks, like you might as if you're going to play it off the board, you'd rather play off the board against a 20% owned pitcher than off the board with a similar team total against like a 2% owned pitcher.
Yeah. So that's both the Mets and the Rangers in that mix. And there's really a whole bunch of teams that are fine-ish that like one of the totally random teams is going to go off because that's the way baseball works. But I think there's enough teams that are not random that you can play mostly the spots that you like. Like, I don't think you just have to say, oh, I'm going to play a National stack and a White Sox stack and a Red stack just because that's what I'm going to do. Like if I'm doing 150, I'll probably have almost everyone on this slate. But in like a 20 to 30 lineup build, which is probably where I'll end up, there's a bunch of teams I'm just not playing, even if I'm not playing the pitchers. Like I'm just not going to do anything with the Cardinals against Aaron Nola, even though I'm not really playing much Aaron Nola. I'm not going to play the Rockies against Logan Webb, even though it's cores. I don't think I'm going to touch anything on either side of the Dodgers-Mariners game in my initial lineups. I mean, yeah, either of those teams can go off. Either of those pitchers are good enough, but at some point I need to just cross some things off the list. And that's the kind of spot I'm happy to just X out. It's really a whole bunch of offenses like that. I'm not going to play Arizona against Justin Steele. I'm not playing the Angels or the Tigers against the good pitchers. I'm not playing with the Red Sox Blue Jays game is kind of like a miniature version of the Dodgers Mariners. It's like good pitchers, not great pitchers. Like I don't want to play the pitchers, but I don't really want to pick on them either. There's just better stuff around. So if I get up over, I'll say 20-ish lineups, I'll probably get to a Red Sox stack. but they're not in my initial group either. There's just a whole bunch of spots like that. Orioles against Zach Eflin, same thing. It's sure they're fine, but I'm trying to narrow down so I'm not just throwing darts at everything.
I could see Minnesota being overowned on this slate simply due to price. I mean, if you take a look at the lineup with the 5.1 implied run total against Jesse Schultens, I mean, outside of Polanco and Lewis, I mean, you get Correa at 4K, right? Filling a shortstop spot. You got Ryan Jeffers at 3,200 filling a catcher spot. Kirilloff is 2,800. I think with this implied total, Julian 3,700. That, if you're going strictly by mean projections, I think, if you're using an optimizer poorly, a lineup builder like Lineup HQ poorly, you may get a lot of Minnesota. So you also have to expect the field to kind of do that a lot.
They're definitely the chalk. Like, I think they're probably more chalky than the Giants. Like, it's definitely those two teams are the chalk because optimizers will give you the Twins and hand building will give you the Twins.
And the Giants aren't all that expensive either in Coors Field with the 6.38 implied run total. I mean, you could fit these guys in. Of course, there's a lot of outfielders in here, but I mean, Patrick Bailey's 3,100, right? You got, Estrada's expensive at 5,000 at second base, but I mean,
I think when people line them up side by side, like I think the Twins probably come in higher on than the Giants. And people, like, everyone's aware of the Giants' pinch hitting tendencies, which always lowers ownership on lefties against a righty. So I think it's going to be Twins 1, Giants 2 in terms of ownership, with a pretty big gap after those two to everything else.
Right, you could always spend you could try to spend as much money as you can on the Braves. Have you ever seen a season?
They're not on this. They're
not on the. Okay, this is the 640 game. But I'm just saying, have you ever seen a season where a team has like multiple players that are over 6K priced and a 7K player in their
wild? Like, it's crazy. And it's just weird how good they are. Like, it seems made up. Like, this can't even be. And nothing looks fluky about it. It's like, I don't know how they turned all these guys. Like, a lot of these guys are elite hitters, of course. But then some of them, I mean, I don't know what they did to make Eddie Rosario and Sean Murphy Hall of Famers, I mean, I don't, there's.
Or even guys like Orlando Arcia.
Yeah.
Right. You see him, it's incredible. Like, what? He's a bunch of home runs. And typically he wasn't that type of guy.
Yeah, it's like it just seems completely real. Like a lot of teams are great, and it's kind of fluky, or they're great for a while, and then they're not. But for now, every day I'm just stunned by how great they are.
I got 2 mailbag questions for you, Dave. Right,
right.
Since we're talking MLB. Right, and we only got like 2 more weeks of the MLB season, so might as well knock them out here. One's in the chat, one came via email. You could send in your mailbag questions if you have any DFS strategy questions. We'll cover them on the show. So email them in, questions@theoryofdfs.com. That goes directly to me. One is in the chat by King Kong. I don't think the actual King Kong. Right?
Wow.
King Kong is here. Can you believe it, Dave?
It's incredible. This is what happens when you get up early.
He's up at the top of the Empire State Building, so like we're gonna have to. He's trying to get reception for his cell service. At some point, he says, "Can you touch on your general thoughts of capping exposures?" So as far as like the tools are concerned, like Lineup HQ, like using min and max exposures.
Yeah, so I extremely heavily cap exposure on hitters. And I will not necessarily cap exposures at all on pitchers. This is the way I do it in baseball. There are days when I'm completely happy to have 100% of a pitcher. And more often than not, I'll have, a 50% owned pitcher and a 40% owned pitcher. So it's a totally different question between hitters and pitchers. But on the hitting side, I will pretty close to never, ever be over 25% on a hitter. If even that. It's just like, it's so variant. I think everyone knows there's a lot of variance with hitters, but I still think people don't understand the extent to which there is. So the way I do it, like if you have all the time in the world, I would put a min max exposure on every single individual hitter that you're using on the whole slate. I don't expect most people to have the time to want to do that. So if you don't, you can just use the overall slider on the build rules page, and I would cap hitter exposure personally at 25%. Yeah, like I don't think you can possibly be spread out enough at hitter, but it's totally different at pitcher. Like I'm going to just play who I want, narrow down my pool a lot further, X out a ton of guys. And I go more towards like, give me a high minimum percentage of certain pitchers with no maximum. So very much depends. And I know he asked like any sport. Well, it's different in every sport and at every position in every sport. So it's definitely not a one size fits all when you change sports.
Well, the thing that to be the most important facet of this is that exposures are not strategy. Exposures are just representations of risk. Because you could build, Dave, you could build 50% of your lineups with Giolito, 50% of your lineups with Hunter Green, and have no lineups that have both of them together, or have half of your lineups with both of them together and have them without them together. So like the individual lineups, the way that lineup HQ works, it's just a knapsack problem solver. So it's just going to hit what's the lineup that I can make with the most amount of median fantasy points, and then hit a restraint, and then skip. Okay, the next one that I could build, and it's going to try to give you whatever you plug into want. So what I mean by the exposures being a representation of your risk, Dave, you're right on the fact of, in general, you probably want to diversify your risk in positions and players that are much higher variant. You don't need to spread out your risk, very much like a stock portfolio. A blue chip stock, like a blue chip ETF or something like that, you could have a lot of, right? Because the downside risk is low. The upside may not be as high, but like in Major League Baseball, like just because a hitter projects for 0.2 more points median than another batter, the range of outcomes on a hitter is ridiculously wide. So lineup HQ, if you don't set a cap, will give you the one hitter that's 0.2 points higher at the same price, like 90% of him and like 2% of the other guy. But there's so much variance in hitting in baseball that maybe you want to diversify a little bit more. It's not a matter of who's the better play and how much of them or how over the field or under the field you are. It's more of how much risk do you want to have in your portfolio. And Dave, when it comes to hitters in your 150 portfolio, you don't want to have more than 25% of your entire portfolio, the monetary amount and the number of lineups on any
Right.
one. You're not lock buttoning like Mike Trout on a slate at 6,200 because like, oh, he's just so much better, a point better than like 7 other hitters in his range.
Exactly. Like no matter how much I like a hitter, like on tonight's slate, expensive outfielders. Yeah, Jordan Alvarez is my favorite expensive outfielder, and I would say air quotes by a lot. But I don't actually want like the difference between him and the next 20 players on tonight's slate. He's not that much more likely to outscore any of them. He's not that much more likely to outscore. You can just pick a random name. Let me just scroll down. Sal Frelick. He's really not that likely to outscore Sal Frelick tonight. Or any other outfield name you randomly pick out in the middle. Luke Raley, Teoscar Hernandez, Matt Wallner, Stephen Kwan. Like, I'm not willing to just play a whole bunch of him in an MME kind of say a whole bunch of anybody for exactly what you're saying.
Right. And pitchers are less variant, so you're much more likely to key in on 6 to 8 pitchers or something and be like, I want to make sure to get a bunch of the better projected pitchers and not pay it. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of variance even in pitching, but you're not screwing around with like, oh, do I want 8% of Jesse Schultons just because I have some diversification? I'm just going to divert that 8% to just the pitchers that I actually do want to play.
It's a lower range of outcomes and a lower ceiling. Like some hitter is going to, a hitter can score 60 points if he wants to.
Only if he wants to. If he
doesn't want to, really, you have to want it. You can't just be like, I don't really care.
Is that in the model? Is the want of each player in our models here?
I mean, I keep asking for it, and no one wants to do it. It's in my model, in the model in the notebook. But yeah, like pitchers they're a little bit more predictable in a 1-game sample, and it's a smaller range of outcomes. And also every once in a while a slate is flipped on this, but 98% of the time, like I don't want to spread out and play everyone everywhere. I don't want to play 30 pitchers and 30 stacks, because even in 150 lineups, like then you have nothing. Like you have like a little bit of, you don't even have a little bit of everything. You have a bunch of nothing. Like I want to have something narrowed down somewhere. And when I have those top few pitchers, if I know I'm going to play 20 different stacks or 15 different stacks, I want my good pitching combo with each of those 15 stacks. I don't want that 1 or 2 random, like, okay, I want to take a shot. I can find a reason to take a shot on the Rays stack tonight. I don't want to lose with that one Rays stack because I didn't play the good pitchers in that stack when it was just as easy to fit them.
So there's a point where when you're playing a lot of lineups that too much diversification means that you're just bleeding money away because you're trying to play too much. I'm not saying that strategically it doesn't matter, but from you're willing to take on some risk in the positions that you feel much more confident in, rather than like, oh, I'm going to play everyone at their actual ownership and just be like, whatever the slate is, the slate is. It's like, no, you purposely said like, I don't care that Giolito is 8% owned. I'm not going to play much of. I mean, like you're making those choices and making sure that your lineups have the combinations of those choices. But if you diversify too much, essentially what you're saying is that you've made no choices, which, hey, to some people like me, if I just go by the numbers, I will have more of players that are underowned and less of players that are overowned. But as far as like statistically concerned, I'm not doing that like strategically. It's just that's the way it worked. If it turns out that projection for David Peterson, for instance, obviously this is way too early. We have David Peterson at 3% projected owned. I think he'll be higher than that on DraftKings. But if he came in at 3%, like it's quite possible when I play 150 to have 30% David Peterson, because his efficient ownership may be like 12 to 15. And because I'm getting such a discount on the ownership, I'm playing exploitatively. So I'm going to end up with a lot more of him to take advantage of how underowned he is. And when you're doing that, diversification it typically works itself out. So many times I'm not putting mins or max exposures on anyone. I'm just letting everything play out. And then if I see that, I'm getting 78% of a hitter, I'll be like you, Dave. I'll be like, yeah, I don't want to put that much risk on one hitter. Let me cap him at like 25 and then rerun it again. And then maybe you'll get the whack-a-mole scenario of, well, he's at 25 now. Now this other hitter is ending up being 70% owned as a one-off, right? And then you cap him. And so that's typically where I'm putting in the caps of like I get these hitters down. And then the easy way to do it is in the build rules and just say, I don't want more than 25%, 30% of any hitter. And it'll kind of spread it out along the way.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And like to double clarify, in case you've never heard me talk about this before, like I build by hand, and I build like 40 to 50 lineups by hand every day because it's easier for me to get exactly what I want. Like, it's really hard. It's kind of what you talk about a lot. It's really hard to get the builder to give you exactly what you actually want. Like, it's easy to get it to give you what you think you want, but then when you look through the lineups, it's always clumped and the mixture's not right. I do run a lot of 150s to practice and figure it out. And at some points in the season, there are days that I don't have time to do it and I'll run the builder. But the time it takes me to get the lineup builder to actually give me what I want is the same amount of time that it takes me to build about 50 lineups by hand. Because I know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish and why I'm trying to accomplish it. And it's just easier for me to actually do it lineup by lineup. But I realize that's not feasible for most people, which is why I talk about the ways to do it in Lineup HQ.
And it's also that I do it to come from the other side of the spectrum. You're building them by hand. Me, I build way more lineups than I need, right? So I'll go in here, and it's quite possible I'll build 5 different 300 sets of lineups, and maybe I'm only playing 40 on that given day. And I'll go through and go, let's take a look at this 300. And I'll go, whoa, okay, I'm getting way too much. Like, these aren't the lineups that I would ever choose because there's, because of projection and ownership. And then I fool with the settings whatever way I need to. There's no, every day it could be different because of how the salary and position allocation is. And then I get to the point where, oh yeah, most of these lineups in this 300 set are lineups that I would consider playing. And then maybe
this is what I think is super interesting is we go about it the complete opposite way, but like for the same goal.
Right.
In that you can, if you just say, I want 50 lineups and you just build 50 lineups, they're not going to be the 50 lineups you actually wanted.
Right. Well,
you have to
especially
do a lot of things.
The tops and the bottoms aren't. Like, I mean, you may find like 10 in the middle that are like, okay, these are fine. But because of how lineup builders work, the top is typically going to be way too chalky and the bottoms are going to be way too low projected. So you need to find a way to get the percentages of lineups that you want. So that's why I just run. When I say I run lineups, that's what I mean by I just run lineups. NFL, I just run lineups and I go, okay, do I really want to play this tight end and that receiver from the same team without their quarterback in all these lineups? No. So let me make a group. Did I know to make a group beforehand? No, because I didn't know how the lineup builder with the projections were going to work out. And I'm like, based on correlation, I don't want those types of lineups. So I start running and building those rules as I see stuff comes out. And once I start seeing stuff comes out and then saying, yeah, this fits what the projection and ownership that I'm looking for, that, the correlation fits in here. I don't mind certain weird types of combinations. Then once I get to that point, then I could run 1,200, 1,500 lineups at that point and find the 50 that I want to play. So it's very, Dave, like it sounds like we're complete opposite sides of the spectrum, but at the end of the day, we're trying to get to the same spot. You're manually building the lineups that you want and then hoping that the builder could build it. And I'm just like, give me 1,500 lineups and let me find those 50 from there.
Yeah. It's super interesting to hear like how different it kind of seems. Yeah, like you say, it kind of seems like we're completely opposite, but it ends up at a very similar spot.
Another mailbag question. I know we talked about this last week, but Dave Fickna sent in to clarify about, we talked about the only in stacks button on the lineup HQ. Just a little bit more of a clarification of what types of hitters are you typically targeting that you're willing to play outside of stacks?
The short answer is anyone with power. Like, what I don't want are the guys who rely on runs and RBIs, which would then relies on their teammates around them doing things. So if you can't hit home runs or steal a bunch of bases, which is only a few guys, like essentially without home run power, I'm checking the button. That's really what it comes down to.
So basically, the only in stacks feature you want to use on players that have outcomes that are less correlated with their teammates. because you're going to be playing them outside of a stack, which means when you play, for instance, Luke Raley, right? You mentioned before, like Luke Raley could hit a home run, right?
Yeah.
The Rays could do poorly, and Raley could have 2 home runs. But if you played a 5-man Rays stack with Raley's 2 home runs and everyone else having like 3 points and 0 points and 5 points, like you ain't gonna win. So you don't have to concern yourself over like, oh, if Raley does well, that means the Rays probably did well. But when you play the light hitting shortstops and stuff like that, where the guy only gets like 6 home runs on the year, so for him to put up like 20 fantasy points, he's probably going 3 for 5. He knocked in 2 runs. Like it's much more likely that the rest of the team has done well, but you only have that one piece. You don't have the other 4 batters.
So exactly what you're saying is Luke Raley versus Taylor Walls.
Right.
So Taylor Walls hitting right next to Luke Raley on Tampa gets I would play the only in stacks button because he's not going to hit 2 home runs. Luke Raley might just hit 2 home runs and Tampa scores 2 runs total. If Taylor Walls has a big game, it's because he's getting a bunch of runs and RBIs because everyone else around him is doing the work.
Another Michael Dompier in chat also has a good point that we don't talk about enough. Only in stacks button is great for weather. If there's a game that is potentially postponed later in the slate and you want to take a shot, like you play them only with stacks, meaning that
right.
If the Red Sox game is a potential to be rained out, you don't want to have like 16 Devers in one-offs in other lineups or Verdugos in other lineups that are guaranteed to get 0 if the game gets rained out. But like a 5-man Red Sox stack, it's like if the game gets rained out, the lineup just dies. But you're
that's
not
what
like
we talk about
it with everyone else.
We talk about that a lot on Crunch Time when Roth is on, and if he gives us that scenario, like I mean, it's 50-50 at this point of this game plays. Yes, that's a great point. Like only in stack every single one of those guys if a game has that kind of postponement risk.
Let's talk a little bit. I mean, I know you're a baseball guy. But you say that you're more of a football fan than a baseball fan.
I am, yeah. In real life, I watch much more football than baseball.
Is there any overview of what you've seen on the NFL slate? I know we're still waiting for some injury news. I mean, it's the second week of the season, and it feels like we're like mid-season. Like we got to wait for like 6 different injuries and. Are we playing Puka Nacua? I love, geez, I don't know about you, but week 2 is one of my favorite weeks because people look at week 1 and they do one of 2 things. They either look at week 1 and go, it's going to happen exactly that way again, right? The target shares, everything, the teams that played bad are going to play bad again. The teams that play well are going to play well again. Or the opposite of, the thing that we thought previously, that before the season, that's going to come back, right? So it's like, oh yeah, he had a bad game last week, but they should have a good game this week because that's what our season, prognosis is. I don't know what type of guy you are. Obviously, you're in the middle somewhere. Yeah. But are there situations, I mean, what on this coming slate for NFL that you're more confident or less confident in?
Well, so from a DFS angle, especially the first month of the season when I'm still more focused on baseball, I kind of take those 2 different examples of the way people look at week 2 and really week 3 and 4 based on what happened early. My view of it is the air quotes better DFS players or the people playing in like higher dollar single entry are not even aware of what happened in week 1. They're playing the projections. So I'm not going to even consider it when I'm playing, like if I'm playing like a $200 single entry tournament or higher. Like I don't think anyone anywhere is going to be fooled or care at all about something that looks like an outlier from week 1.
But sometimes Dave, I want to use your talking point about projections. Projections don't know. I mean, projections need inputs also, right?
Correct.
Right. So yes. Just the small amount of sample size that you get out of week 1 still has to be some type of input into the projection we have to give a target share to Puka Nacua. We have to give a target share to Trey Flowers, right? These guys that got like 40+% target shares in 1 week last week. Maybe their real target share is only 22. Maybe it's only 10. Maybe it's actually 38. But when you make projections, you have to put some amount of assumptions in to do so. Now, Stephon Diggs, we don't have to. We've seen enough of Stephon Diggs in the Bills offense, right? We've seen a lot. Travis Kelce, if he plays, I think we could accurately predict, a narrow range of what his target share and his efficiency is going to be with Patrick Mahomes. It's these situations where, the projections, if you regress 1 week's worth of data, Puka Nacua is the Rams wide receiver 1. And of course, he has an oblique injury, and maybe he doesn't even play, right? Jacoby Myers may not play, right? He's doubtful. We've seen Devontae Adams in 1 game with Jimmy Garoppolo, where he's targeting either Adams or Myers on almost every play passing. How do we know that's going to continue? Calvin Ridley, look, alpha receiver. Christian Kirk got 3 targets or something. Is that going to continue? Is that not? But we still need to put them into projections. So some of these guys are actually going to project higher or lower based on even 1 week's worth of sample size. So Dave, week 2 to me is the projections are nonsense, right? Isn't that your line?
There you go.
Like
that is correct. Yes.
Right. I've been the most successful the first 6 weeks of NFL, first 6 to 8 weeks, almost every year. And it's coming from the attitude of, that 13.09 for Puka Nacua, like that could easily be 8 or it could easily be 24. And I use your Robbie Ray rule. I call it the Robbie Ray rule because you said it before when I was a RotoGrinders subscriber. Because I read your musings before I was a host here. You always said, Robbie Ray, he gets 10 strikeouts or he walks 6 guys and gives up 18 runs or whatever. You play him when he's not owned and you fade him when he is, right? You lean into the variance. So I'm looking at guys like Nacua and Flowers and all these guys that kind of performed last week that even in the projections, you have to put something in. Like those are the most fragile. And those are the most types of situations where, maybe I do play Christian Kirk if a lot of people play Calvin Ridley. Maybe I play Rashad Bateman if a lot of people play Trey Flowers. I don't think anyone wants to play James Conner because he's James Conner. Maybe I play some how good are the Cardinals? They're trying to tank. It's like maybe they're not, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about when it comes to looking at the projections, but knowing that in week 2 of NFL, there's a lot of fragility in them.
Yeah. I mean, quite simply, what my lineups will all look like is whichever of those top, 15 wide receivers, the guys, we know exactly who they are and that they're good. Chase, Diggs, Adams, Metcalf, Ridley, Lamb, like whichever of those guys end up with the lowest projected ownership, that's my lineup. There's really nothing more to it than that.
Why don't we look? So Lamb? Are you going to play Garrett Wilson with Zach Wilson behind center? He's 7,500 and 3% owned.
I am.
DK Metcalf 2% owned at 7K. I mean, these are obviously
these numbers will change, but yeah, like that's exactly what I'm going to do. Like the guys that I know for sure are absolutely good and are absolutely going to get the ball thrown to them. That's who I'm going to play.
That are also low owned.
Right. So in choosing between Calvin Ridley and DK Metcalf, like it's not even close. Like Metcalf.
Or even CeeDee Lamb and Devontae Adams or Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's like, well, CeeDee Lamb is a good receiver. He's 7,700. You're going to play him.
Yeah,
but you may not play both of them in the same lineup. I mean, you don't take it to the extreme where you're like, well, I'm going to just play all of the guys that are pivots over. Like, you still need raw points.
Yeah, I have no issue playing. Like, it's not like anyone. These football slates are so big. It's not like anyone is 60% owned. So, like, I don't mind playing Jamar Chase or St. Brown with the Lamb or the Metcalf. My lineup is not going to be Ridley, Chase, and St. Brown if I'm spending up a receiver. Like, I don't want the 3 chalky guys when they're not any better than the next 10 guys. Like, they're all really good.
Right. Well, they are better, but they're only slightly better. And compared to their ownership, they're not that much better.
Right.
Very similar to what you said about Yordan Alvarez, right? Before. Like,
Yeah,
you may think that he's better, but he's not worthy of 30% ownership versus another guy being 5% owned that, right? Like,
yeah,
right
I treat
underneath.
wide receivers a lot like hitters. Like, that's where I want to be more spread out, not go overboard on anyone. Like, target share is a more predictive thing. Like, it's not as variant, but it is like, it's the same idea of the top projected guy versus the 12th projected guy. It's all the same guy. Like, range of outcomes, ceiling. Somebody is slightly more likely to be a little better, but it's essentially just this big group of all the same great player.
Michael Dompier in the YouTube chat says, it's interesting to listen to multiple shows with many listeners and hearing about all the players that, quote, no one is going to play. So I advise to play him and seeing if that guy gets steam. And you do see that, especially in the single entry 3-max, like the smaller field stuff. The large field, if you're playing the Millie, if that effect is not as great, and a lot of times it's of different players. Like, casual people tend to play certain players over other players, but then like sharp players that are, listening to shows like this, like, I'm not saying that DK Metcalf's going to end up being like 18% owned in the SPY because it's like, oh, he's an obvious pivot over Calvin Ridley. But that effect does happen to some degree where you get the low owned guy that is like twice as owned as you thought he was going to be. And then sometimes you get the chalk guy that actually is much lower owned than, because everyone's like, oh, everyone's playing that guy, so I'm not going to play him. And then he ends up being half as owned as you thought he was. And at that ownership, you're like, maybe I should have played him.
I feel like the ownership projections have kind of almost started factoring their own future into themselves, if that's a sentence. Because if people weren't already doing that, then you would see a bunch of guys projected at 40% ownership, or 3 or 4 guys, and then a bunch of guys projected at 5. But like, it's already like, the fact that people do that is already factored into why the ownership is not really that spread out. Why, like, what's our top projected guys like 20% owned right now? If that effect wasn't already in play, it would be Ridley and Nakul would be projected at 40%, and
everyone else would be
1%.
Right.
So like, I feel like these ownership projections are kind of already factoring in their own futuristic ownership making.
So that they're self-aware.
Exactly.
Right. We're the only site that has self-aware ownership projections.
That's a great selling point. Yes. but it's really, I really think that's kind of what it is. Because if everyone wasn't worried about it, then you would just have a few chalk guys and then a bunch of 1%.
Right. For NFL as well as MLB, you could use our fantasy pick'em tool for Prize Picks and Underdog. It is a premium feature. It goes along with the Prize Picks and Underdog extension for Chrome. And you can check this out every day. I mean, it shows that we update it multiple times a day for all the sports. I'm not going to show anything because it's premium members only. But you can go to MLB, NFL, CFB, NHL, NBA when it comes around, and we compare our statistical projections that you could download yourself also to the Prize Picks and Underdog projections that are up there. And I also compared like the bat and the blitz projections for MLB and NFL. And anytime, go there and it'll show you what's plus EV, what's minus EV, what are the win rates based on our statistical projections. My suggestion is get it as early as possible. Get the best number, get the best price. And I have a whole bunch of stuff. I have a whole bunch of MLB stuff on Prize Picks and Underdog today. Unfortunately for you guys, almost all of them have moved, by a strikeout, by a couple of fantasy points. So the only ones on the board that still, I believe, still have some value left is, I know, Cheese, you're not going to like this. Giolito over 5.5 strikeouts against the Rangers.
I actually don't mind his strikeout prop at all. I think.
And he also may give up 5 runs in the process.
I don't want his 6 strikeouts and 4 homers tonight.
Right. And then I also have Coles under 7 Ks against the Pirates. Right. Not on the slate, obviously, for DFS.
Yeah, I didn't even actually look at him because he's not on the slate.
Right. So, but compared to, I think that his efficient line on multiple sports books is around 6.5. Right, it's like 6.5 at like minus 111. So the under 7 should should show some value, and it's under on both the bat and plate IQ projections. There's a bunch of others that were there, but they've moved a half a strikeout. So my suggestion is you sign up for RotoGrinders Premium, right? Get the combo premium package, get everything, right? Click on that link in the description, get $10 off your first month. And when you wake up in the morning, right, just wake up, you go to work, you wake up at 7:30, take 2 or 3 minutes, go to this page, right? Go to the Pick'em tool, see what lines are up, what projections are up on Prize Picks and Underdog. If you see a couple that are off, bang, 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 make a 5-pick flex card, and then you get dressed and take a shower and you go up to your day. You don't have to sit here monitoring it or anything like that. It's an easy way. This is like, I would say, based on my experience, much more worthwhile and much less time in comparison to like playing MLB cash games in, double ups, especially, in September, where the only people that are masochistic enough to do that are typically the best players.
Yeah. I just want to double point out the key to what you said. Like, make sure you're doing it as early as you can when you see the lines, because the lines will move. Once the lines move, the picks are no longer as useful. Like the value gets sucked out of them when the line moves. So make sure you're paying attention to that.
Right. If it's 6 o'clock at night Eastern, and you're like, oh, let me take a look at here for the 7 o'clock MLB games, like the likelihood of you finding anything of value is very, very small. Right. You want to get them early overnight. I mean, Underdog and Prize Picks Underdog sometimes post stuff at like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. Take a look. If anything's big enough off, it could be $10, $20, whatever. Put together a 3-pick on Underdog, 4 or 5 on 5 or 6 on Prize Picks. Just get them early. You get them early consistently, and the number moves in your favor by game time. That's a good, very good signal that that you're going to be profitable long term.
Yep.
Dave, $1 Million Musings. You got 2 more weeks of it. What do you do? Do you have a routine that, like, after the season, do you go to get hand massages or something? You gotta rest up your fingers, your keyboard typing fingers for what's the off season look like?
Well, October is like so much TV. Like I get up and I sit in my recliner every day for a month, and I'll binge watch a bunch of shows, and I will relax, and it will be fantastic. And then I kind of get back to work. But back to work until next baseball season is still like a lot. It seems very restful.
So you're not going to be writing esports content.
I don't think the world needs that, honestly.
Okay, you can follow Dave on Twitter, DavePotts2 on Twitter. Cheese is good. You have all the MLB stuff here at RotoGrinders. You're also going to be on Crunch Time tonight, right?
Yes, we will hit all the baseball stuff again, get some go a little deeper into some position by position at I think the usual time, about 6:20 Eastern.
Right. And before that is Grinders Live at 5 o'clock Eastern. Hit that notification bell. You'll know when we'll go live. We go live on the channel. We have tons of NFL content coming out. I'll be on the Blitz show tomorrow with Alex Dunlap and Derek Carty. That's only for premium members, and that'll come out tomorrow afternoon. So you can check out more of my thoughts on the Sunday NFL slate then. Send in your questions to the mailbag. Questions at theoryofdfs.com. We'll answer them on the show. And as always, hit those thummy thumbs. Hit the thummy thumbs. Hit the subscribe button. Hit everything you can. Hit if you're on YouTube, just hit everything. Just hit everything, right? And I'll be back. I'll be back Monday. So I'm here, getting you up to speed on the day in DFS props and pick'em Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern on RotoGrinders Today.